everybody. So my channel so far has mostly been about my wanderings in the UK, in Rwanda, a little bit about writing. But I think I'm going to add another dimension at the moment, which is to do with VR, virtual reality. So for Christmas, I was gifted by my dad Marilyn this Oculus Quest 2 virtual reality headset. Now, I need to explain that the first time, well, the only other time that I ever used virtual reality was in the early 90s when I was probably about 12 or 13. And I was in Covent Garden in London with my dad, and there was a guy who set up this stand, and he had this big clunky black headset, and he was charging people to try it out. So all I remember about virtual reality back then was that, I mean, it was a clunky headset. You moved around using a joystick, and I think you pressed the button to interact with things. And the graphics were really pixelated. So I think what it was like a sort of a Game of Thrones landscape, and there was a dragon wandering about, and I can't remember if there was actually a point to the game or if it was just to experience being in this world, but it really did look like 90s game graphics. So the closest thing that I can link it to is when I was a kid in Britain, we had this TV show called Nightmare, which was a group game where one of the players was kind of blindfolded and put into this 3D virtual reality world, and the other three teammates had to try and guide that person through the game, interacting with other characters, solving puzzles, and getting to the end and answering riddles and winning the game. And it was very, very kind of pixelated. So you can imagine when I put on this Oculus for the first time, I wasn't expecting that much. I kind of been traveling around over Christmas. I'd slipped into this food coma. So it was a few days after I got it that I actually sat down and went, right, you know, I've got nothing else to do at the moment, got some time, got some space, let's unbox this and see what it can do. I was blown away. I mean, as everybody who's first ever experienced this has been, it was incredible. Really just far more than I was expecting. So for the past few weeks I've been playing this throwback game on GOG called Black Mirror, which Dad got me into, and I really like strategy games where you're wandering around creepy places, finding objects, making objects do things, solving puzzles, that kind of game. And so the first thing that I bought with Oculus was a game called A Dark Matter. And it is Black Mirror, like personified. You are standing in a dark and misty London street with leaves blowing past your feet. It is hyper real. It feels so real, and you look down and you move your hands, and your hands have got gloves on, and it's really quite incredible. So I really got immersed in that. I was playing that. I dropped into a world called Maloka, which is sort of a meditation where you're sitting in the center of the universe, and these incredibly beautiful mandalas are expanding around you, and you breathe in time to this happening. It's truly beautiful to look at. I was watching a lot of VR animations, which is just short little animations where you can look around you and see things. So yeah, I was totally immersed in that. I was really enjoying myself. And despite what I go on to say now, I am still absolutely in love with VR. I'm having a fantastic time on it. But after playing for maybe about 5 hours over 3 days, so not very much, it was quite spread out, it was New Year, I had other things going on. But even after that, I started to experience some slightly strange effects, which I can categorise as physical and I can categorise as emotional. So I'll go through both of these. I will explain what they are in a moment, but as they started to happen, I was sort of thinking, oh, this is a bit odd. So I went on YouTube and I Googled, and I discovered that this is what is known as a VR hangover, and that it is a thing, and that quite a few people have been reporting very similar experiences. So I'll kick off with the physical experiences. So to do with visual disturbance and coordination. So the first time that I noticed something was a bit off, I think it was after maybe my first or second session. So I'd maybe been playing for about an hour or so and I came off and I went to do some word processing, and it felt, or it looked as though the black text was floating on top of the white background, on top of the page. So it's hard to explain. It felt as though the flat page had a new level of depth to it. That was the first thing that I noticed. And the second thing that I noticed that quite a few people have been reporting is when I picked up my phone. And anybody who hasn't experienced this will think it sounds absolutely nuts. But remember that for about the past hour or two, I've been picking up objects that don't exist in virtual reality. And I'd be sitting there with my phone, which does exist, without my headset, with my phone, here in reality. And it felt as though either my hand or the phone wasn't entirely real. And it felt as though I kept expecting my hand to pass through my phone and come towards my face, like without the phone. And it's just, it was a complete dislocation of physical object and brain processing power. It really was quite a trippy sensation. So let's just talk about these physical effects first. Now, I have no scientific evidence to back this up. I've been looking for papers. There seems to be very little concrete, conclusive research done on this yet. So if you've got any papers that might offer extra insight, please do drop them below. So what I'm talking about is only from my perception and my opinion of perhaps what's happening here. Is, as far as I understand it, with virtual reality, it's a flat screen very close to your eyes that is creating the illusion of depth by the way that it's using lighting. So, you know, your eyes think that you're looking at something very far off, but it's actually right in front of you. And I think, especially with the word processing, that was just possibly a little bit of eye strain, getting used to the whole way that virtual reality works with your eyes. But I think I was looking at the flat screen of the word processor and my brain was expecting there to be extra depth in there, and therefore it was looking for the extra layer of depth on the flat screen, which is what it does in virtual reality to create that illusion of space. So I think it was just my brain kind of adjusting to looking at another flat screen and saying, oh, well, you know, we know what to do with flat screens now. We put an extra bit of depth in there. And I think that's probably what happened there. The second one, again, I think it's just to do with, like I say, you're in virtual reality and you're picking up objects that don't exist. You're throwing paper aeroplanes that don't exist. You're playing ping pong with a ball that doesn't exist. And you are getting sort of tremors from the hand controls. It gives you a sensation of a solid object. And in virtual reality, so there are objects that you can hold and interact with, but the background items you can just pass your hand through. You know, nothing stops your hand. If there's a table and it's not part of the game, I could just put my hand through it. And so maybe it was just my brain going, is this an actual interactive object or is this part of the background? You know, can my hand just pass through it? So I don't know. I think that's what was going on. But what disturbed me a little bit was that this went on for quite a long time. So, you know, I was looking at people and they're all describing quite similar experiences. And most of them said that it passed, you know, within an hour or two of taking off the headset. Whereas I was still experiencing it. I thought, right, this is getting quite intense now. And I took off the headset and I left it and I went to bed and I got up the next day. And 24 hours later, without using the headset again, I was still experiencing this quite strongly. And I was starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable, thinking, well, surely this should have passed by now. But about another 12 hours later, so about a day and a half after I stopped using the headset, things really calmed down. So the second part of this was an emotional blip. And I have to make it very clear before I continue that I cannot prove that this was actually linked to VR. But it was an emotional blip that was very out of character for me, and VR was the only thing that I had been doing differently in the past couple of days. And when I looked this up, there were a few other YouTubers talking about something similar. I've linked to a guy below who literally did a video called VR Sadness, where he experienced something very similar. But on day 3, I experienced in the evening a real drop in my mood, like a real low. Like I was feeling angsty and sad, like just a big ball of angst and sadness, and it lasted for about 2 hours, and I was just in a really black mood, and that is really out of character for me. And it passed after about 2 hours, but I was sitting there thinking, that's not normal. And like I say, the only thing that I could link it to was, well, VR is the only thing that I've been doing consistently and differently in the past couple of days. Now, I've read a couple of different explanations for this, so a couple of theories. The first one is that it's to do with the disappointment of returning to, like, reality. That, you know, because in virtual reality you can do anything you want. You can fly, you can breathe underwater, you can go anywhere you want, you can drop into worlds, drop out of worlds. It's incredibly liberating and good fun. That of course, you know, when you come back to reality, you can't do those things anymore. And, you know, you have to put up with real world disappointment and other people's reactions and Okay, so the second one was Mark again was talking about he had a bit of an existential not an existential crisis, but a bit of existential angst when he came back into this reality. And it made him question, it was kind of like a 13th floor kind of scenario where you think you've come back to reality, but is this reality? You know, does this really exist? Yes. So what I'm getting from these different opinions is that VR probably affects different people in different ways. So perhaps it might play on an insecurity or an underlying angst that you already have, and that will come through in the VR sadness issue. For me, I don't think it was the first one, because yes, virtual reality is incredible. It really is amazing, but it isn't that amazing yet that I would want to, you know, check out of this reality and move into VR full time. For one thing, the graphics here are better. But just generally speaking, I think until we get to San Junipero levels of reality in virtual reality, I would rather be in this one. So I don't think for me that wasn't what was causing it. The second one about the existential angst, well, I don't think that either for me, because, you know, I've been through that. I went through it quite early on in my life, and came out the other side pretty much thinking, well, yeah, it's quite likely that none of this really exists, or certainly doesn't exist in the way that we perceive it to exist, colours, for example. But regardless of whether it exists or it doesn't exist, this is what we've got, so might as well get on with it. And so I don't think I really had that to go through. So for me, the closest thing that I could really liken it to was coming down off a strong stimulant. So for example, let's say that you have your first ever cup of coffee, and you drink a cup of coffee and you're buzzing. It's like, woof, you know, it's a whole new level of whoa, awake, and you know, you're racing around doing whatever it is that you're doing, and then bang, it wears off, and you're like, ugh. You know, it's that kind of, you know, on a strong stimulant, it wakes your brain up, it shakes it about a bit, and then when it withdraws, it goes away, you're like, you don't feel quite right. And that's what it felt like to me. And what's kind of backed this up for me is, as with a lot of people, these effects either disappear or reduce considerably over time and the more that you're using the headset. So I haven't experienced that sad drop again since. And the visual things seem to have mostly gone away. So it seems to be almost like a tolerance level in your brain. So, for example, you have that cup of coffee, you're like, wow, and then you come back down. But then over time, the more coffee that you drink, you build up a tolerance. So, you know, after a year or so, unless you're drinking 6 or 8 cups of coffee a day, you're not really feeling it. It's not to say it isn't doing anything, but you just don't feel it. So I think it's kind of maybe a bit like that. And I think we've really underestimated how powerful or how much of a shock VR is to the brain. Because we're looking at it like it's marketed as just a fun thing to do, and it is incredibly fun. But because of that, we think, oh, it's just like any computer game, you know. And then we put the headset on, and it isn't. It's a completely immersive sensory experience. And your brain is working overtime in these environments that you've never been to before, especially if you're playing something creepy, you know, you're kind of expecting something to jump out at you. Or even there was a brilliant animation where there was I dropped into this VR animation where there was a lamplight fish, so big teeth and a little light over it, and you see that somebody's going to touch it, and you turn around, you're underwater, you turn around, and there's just this diver right here above you, and you're like, ha! You know, wasn't expecting that. So your brain is on high alert because you're in an environment you've never been to before. And at the same time, things aren't behaving as you expect them to. You go to pick something up and your hand might pass right through it. Or you go to pick something up and you feel like you're holding it. And this is also shown, a lot of people were saying that they get motion sickness. So in VR, there's 2 ways to move around. When you're beginning, it's a good idea to use something called teleport, which is literally, I'm here, I point over there and I go from here to there like that. So 1 minute I'm here, the next minute I'm there. And that doesn't involve any real moving around. You're just standing here, you're standing there. It's a bit easier on the senses. Whereas if you want to, you can switch to something called smooth motion, which is, I mean, it's a bit like if you were holding a joystick and you're kind of going forward and you're moving around in every direction, quite as if you're walking. Well, as if you're floating. It's a bit quicker than walking, and there's no bouncing. And a lot of people, you know, when you're getting used to that, a lot of people feel a bit motion sick. I felt a little bit when I first tried it. And then you get used to it. But the same thing is happening in VR as would be happening if you were sitting in a car. In a car, you're sitting on a piece of metal and you're moving along, and your brain, well, your eyes are saying, hey guys, we're on the move. And your legs are going like, I don't think so. You know, I'm not feeling this. So what your eyes are telling your brain and what your physical body is telling your brain are conflicting. And the explanation I've heard for motion sickness is, you know, in terms of evolution, we've evolved to understand that if you feel like you're spinning or you're moving, but your body is saying that you're not, then likelihood is you've eaten something you shouldn't have done, and perhaps you're poisoned, perhaps you've had too much alcohol, perhaps you're intoxicated, and therefore what we need to do is we need to sweat and we need to vomit to purge ourselves of whatever this poison is. So be gone, foul beast. And that unfortunately is what's kicking off, because, you know, we've had this technology for the blink of an eye and our brains haven't yet understood, actually this isn't the same as being poisoned, this is just entertainment. So that's why we feel motion sick, because our bodies think, you know, maybe we've had something we shouldn't have. So it is very, very powerful. It's a really immersive, powerful experience, and we're not perhaps ready for it mentally. We think we know what we're going into, but we're not really prepared for quite how powerful it can be on our brains and our psyche. So I definitely won't stop using it. I'm enjoying it, and I have to agree with what, you know, most other people are saying, is that these symptoms have all pretty much worn off now. They've gone away, and my brain has got used to using it. So it's a little bit uncomfortable, but then it seems to get better. But my top tips if you are experiencing the similar kind of issues, first of all, please tell me about it. I would love to know what your experiences have been. And also, if you're using VR and you haven't had any symptoms, I'd like to hear about it as well, because it would be interesting to know kind of what the divide is between people who are experiencing like trippiness afterwards and people who just aren't. That would be quite interesting. But for the physical side of it, I would definitely say if you're experiencing real visual weirdness like the floating text, stop for a while. Definitely stop, because I think that's possibly something to do with a mild bit of eye strain. And I would probably suggest avoid any screen until it stops for a bit. I'd go for avoid anything with backlighting. I think that's what the issue is. So maybe go away and read a book for a bit. I don't know, go and do some gardening. Go and do something that doesn't involve staring at a backlit screen, because I think that's when the brain kicks in and it goes, maybe we should add some extra depth for fun. And expect it to last a while. I mean, like I said, I thought that would maybe I'll have that for a couple of hours until my eyes have relaxed. And I had it for about a day and a half, so it was quite intense. And with the phone, if you're experiencing that sense of objects not quite being real, just tap it against yourself, and tap your body, tap your skin, tap your hand, and squeeze it a little bit. Just apply a little bit of pressure and move it around a bit, and tell your brain this is a real object, this is a solid object. And I know this is going to sound mental to anybody who hasn't actually experienced this yet, but it's a very real thing. Like I say, you're using a game controller shaped like this to pick up and interact with anything, and it's very intuitive. So your hand is actually moving, it's doing things. But the solid object itself never really changes shape. Any solid object is going to be this shape, these dimensions. And some things aren't solid, and some things you can put your hand through, and other things you'll pick up, and it will feel like they have different dimensions, but really they're all going to be these dimensions. So that's what we're dealing with here is, you're holding a phone like this, but your brain thinks, it should probably be this shape. And it isn't. So is it a real object then or not? I think it's something to do with that. But anyway, tapping yourself and just reminding yourself this is a solid object. If you're experiencing slight existential angst, or you're feeling anxiety, or you're feeling uncomfortable, I mean, first off, you can turn it off and take a break. But if you're in there and you want to continue playing, I suggest just close your eyes for a moment and feel the pressure of the mask, and just mindfulness. Be aware that you are wearing a mask. I know this sounds stupid, but just feel that you're wearing the mask. Be mental aware that you're wearing the mask, and tell your brain it's a game. We're playing a game. This is not reality. This is not real. We are sitting in our house or standing in our house. We are perfectly safe. I can feel the carpet beneath my feet. I'm breathing the air of the room that I am in, and this is just a game. What I am seeing is not real. And then continue, and it can just be a case of, I think it's a case of calming down your mind and calming down your body, and just being really mindful of the fact that it's a game, because it sounds so obvious, but your brain doesn't think it's obvious. Like I say, you're in these environments you've never been in before, expecting things to happen, but you don't know what. And part of you wants them to happen because you're excited because it's a game, and part of you is a little bit of lizard brain that hasn't quite evolved yet that's going, shock, horror, be alert, so of course it's going to be weird stuff going on, but yeah, expect these things, expect them. If you're going to VR for the first time, expect that you might have a bit of an emotional reaction to it after a day or two, or that you might start to have some weird visual and spatial and coordination issues. But also expect that these will pass, because everybody's saying that they pass, except for a very small minority who appear to have a harder time with this stopping. And if you're still having really intense symptoms and they're not going away after about a week or so, maybe go and talk to somebody, and don't feel weird about doing that. I mean, this is new technology. It's stuff that our brains haven't really encountered before on this scale. So it's normal that weird stuff's going to happen. Yeah, so just go and talk to somebody about that. Yeah, so that's kind of my experience. Give yourself time, spend some time away from the screen and away from any backlit screen. And the only last thing that I want to mention here is I'm going to do another video on this, because there are a lot of children, young children, on VR. I mean, if you go into something like VR Chat, you will regularly bump into 6-year-old, 10-year-olds, young children playing these things. And all I'm going to say is to the parents, even if you have never had any of these effects from playing VR, just consider that your kids might. And it might be very hard to tell, because, I mean, young kids, their coordination's all over the place, their emotions are all over the place anyway. So it might be kind of hard to tell. But, you know, if they've been playing VR and their coordination is off more than normal, or if they suddenly have very extreme mood swings and it's out of character, just consider that might be part of it. I don't know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of research on this yet, but just be aware of that. Look out for it, even if you yourself have not had those experiences. So yeah, basically that's just my thoughts on all of this at the moment. And I would love to hear if you've recently started playing VR. You know, have you experienced any of these symptoms, any physical or emotional weirdness? Drop it below. If you've been playing it for a long time, did you have these? Have they stopped over time? Have they got worse over time? You know, what's been your experience? And also, have you got any other tips for coping with this kind of disorientation and dislocation? Either the existential angst or the eye strain, or just anything really. I mean, what got you through it? So yeah, let me know, and I will see you out there.